I get that newsletter, and if you don't, you should, from Matt Brown, Extra Points. There are 3 packets of stuff, and I mean stuff in a good way, that I've received from Matt Brown. He's been all over the place. It's a theory of how to build a championship football roster. So what do college football players actually want? And then also what he was like to cover the championship game in the weekend. Matt, we haven't had you on in a while. You've been incredibly busy. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for your time. So what was it like? Because I know initially you were wondering if you were going to cover the championship game, and eventually people went to bat for you, which they shouldn't have to do. Congratulations on getting in.
I really appreciate that. It was, I think, a humbling couple of days to realize that there were people that were willing to go to bat for me without being asked. I don't begrudge anybody at the college football playoff for initially declining to credential me. They've got a lot of people throughout the country that want to get into this game. I understand it. I'm glad it all worked out. And it's going to be an experience that I remember forever. I was a little concerned leading into the game, honestly, that it wouldn't be that great of an environment because, as I'm sure you guys saw, it was like $3,000 to get into the stadium. the demand for tickets was insane. And often when you have that kind of thing happening in an NFL stadium, the crowd becomes pretty corporate. It's not the actual diehard fans. I don't know if it's because both the Ohio State and Notre Dame fan bases are clinically insane. Both of them, you could probably have benefited from some therapy leading into this game. So there was so much anxiety. I don't know if it was a function of the stadium itself or the number of students that were in there, but I really thought it was a high energy, high intensity building, a really good football game outside of maybe 5 minutes leading into the third quarter, and an experience that I'm going to remember for a long time. I mean, you guys have been doing this for a long time too. Sometimes you don't let yourself really enjoy the moment, but there was a quiet minute when it's 2:00 in the morning. Everyone's left the stadium. It's just me on the field with a bunch of confetti and realizing it sure beats breaking rocks for a living, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. Do you have any ideas on shortening the calendar that would work?
It's a really good question, right? And I've tried to read some of the thought pieces about this because I understand the concern that we get a little bit of college football fatigue this late in January. You're kind of we're all trained, if you're somebody of a certain age, for the season ending shortly after January 1st. The only solution I can think of that would really help the television side is the NFL agreeing to actually be cooperative rather than adversarial through this process. You don't want to have your big games going up against the NFL. And the limitations in the Sports Broadcasting Act right now break the kind of Saturday monopoly that the college football's had for a minute. So we have games that are kicking off on Thursdays and Fridays. We have a championship game late on a Monday night in the Eastern time zone when a lot of people have gone to bed. I don't know how you could squeeze everything else in without it being more unsafe or about starting the season way earlier. But hopefully there's a way to work with the NFL to get these games into maybe some better television windows than they were this year.
Matt, what is the kind of story coming out of that game for you? Is it this resurgence of Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman and how close they came? Is it Ryan Day's redemption, Ohio State's NIL payroll? Like, kind of where was your head coming out of that in terms of just seeing it all unfold?
Did you know that most calorie deficit calculators don't work? My dietitian recommended the Lasta app to me, and it turned out to be the only one that got my calorie deficit right. Thanks to it, I lost 14 pounds in 1 week. Ready to kickstart your journey to healthy weight loss? Calculate your ideal calorie deficit using the Lasta app right now.
Yeah, I really don't think it's the payroll. And I wrote a story about that. We could talk about that in more detail here if you want.
Sure.
But I do think how people perceive Ryan Day after these last couple of weeks is super fascinating. I think it's a little bit of an overgeneralization or oversimplification to say that Ohio State fans were frustrated with Day because Ohio State struggled with Michigan the last 4 years. That's definitely part of it. But the Buckeyes also, if we're being totally honest, did not meet expectations this whole regular season. They had lost 2 consecutive games to Oregon. They kind of farted around, even some of their wins with Penn State. The offense was never anywhere close to as consistent or dynamic as it was expected to be over the year. And that's a reflection of the insanely high expectations that this team has, which were not unjustifiable given that, you were starting like 9 seniors on defense and you have the highest 247 roster composite rankings in the country. So now Day has won, Ohio State's won beat like what, 5 top 5 teams over the course of that season. It's one of the best strengths of schedules ever. Won big game after big game, and most of them were not close. Like their mantra was to leave no doubt. I think that's really what happened. The closest comparison I can only think of would have been like how Miami fans felt about Larry Coker. Larry Coker won a title, if I remember. But there was kind of a sense like, is this guy just a caretaker? Is he really the engine behind this program? And eventually he gets in the Hall of Fame. It's a very strange thing to have a guy that is unquestionably one of the very best that he does, or what he does in college football history. Say nothing of what actively doing it in the country. And yet a lot of fans, even now, I think, are like, I didn't really enjoy it that much, Like how people reconcile that, it will be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, because if Miami, and I'm not a Miami fan, but just remembering when they came on in the early 80s, Snellenberger will always be a godlike figure because he's the one that was there when they made the surge and beat Nebraska. Jimmy Johnson, of course, because he's brash, and then even Dennis Erickson. But Larry Coker, probably in some cases, people forget he was also one that won it all.
Exactly right. And from what I remember from reading Bruce Feldman's book and from, I did some research around this era for my book, you would find, ex-Miami players or Miami fans that come back and I'm like, this team doesn't have the same swagger. The leadership's not coming from the head coach. This was a guy that is more of a caretaker rather than someone to take it to the next level. Certainly not the same personality as a guy like Schnelly or Johnson. But that's not necessarily bad. At the end of the day, you win 92% of your games, coached a bunch of Hall of Famers, and got a natty. If that's the worst case scenario, I think you're doing pretty good. I wonder what the attitude out of Columbus will be 3 or 4 months from now as they kind of as more good news kind of comes in from Michigan and Penn State and Oregon, because Penn State's going through a very similar thing right now with James Franklin.
Do you think of the teams in the playoffs, who are the ones that will take this and take it and advance next year? Who will build on it? Is it? I mean, Penn State's got a lot of guys coming back, and James Franklin has that, like you just said, the same kind of thing, but to a much more severe degree than Ryan Day ever has. I don't think there's people in Columbus, like you mentioned, that quite realize how bad it is for the folks in Happy Valley when it comes to those big games. But who's the ones who can take it, come back, build on it, get around or so further?
I do like both Notre Dame and Penn State there. And I wrote about this a little bit this week, and I'll be interested to hear maybe what you fellas think. But my theory here is in a world where rosters turn over pretty significantly and pretty quickly from year to year with the transfer portal and everything, that there is a meaningful advantage over a 16-game season to having a really, really experienced team. Lots of seniors, lots of redshirt juniors, lots of guys that have played a lot of college football. And if you can return those rosters, just like how we say in college basketball that coaches and GMs try to want to get old and stay old, and maybe you have a couple of freshmen or underclassmen, but you really want to build them around guys that have played college basketball together. I suspect that's going to be more of the model that works here. And then I think if you look at Notre Dame and Penn State, who are projected to return pretty significant chunks of their teams from this year, they'd be in that great spot. This was something that kind of came up from talking to players and the post-game press conference at the championship game. Ohio State had to lean a lot on their depth, on their player-driven leadership, and on their ability to regulate their emotions, knowing it's a super long season. You can't go 160% balls to the wall every single week if you're playing an NFL schedule, which is now what you have to do if you want to win a national championship game. So those two might not be the most talented teams next year, but I suspect there really is going to be some advantage of being able to come back and say, I know who my linemen are going to be. My tailbacks, my tight ends have been in these big moments before. We're going to be okay.
All right, so what do college football players actually want besides a lot of shoes and money and whatever they can if they want to move on and transfer portal? But break it down with this story because I'm intrigued by this.
Sure. So on Saturday, before the championship game, there was another event elsewhere in Atlanta with athletes.org, which is an advocacy group that's trying to organize football players. They had this meeting with, I think, about 50 players. I saw Diego Pablo there. That you had guys from North Carolina, a couple people from Baylor, a couple people from UNC, but importantly, lots and lots of different schools. And the idea was not for them to come out and say that we've created a union, but for those players to talk about elements of their experience with each other and begin the organizing process. And that's what kind of stuck out to me, because what the players were telling us is like they don't really talk about this stuff a lot with people outside of their own locker rooms. You're going to find that there's not complete agreement about what players want out of the transfer portal. A lot of the athletes that we spoke to at that meeting said, hey, we don't think 10 days in January is enough time because lots of players get pushed into the portal from their coaches, or we might call that processed. And you need more than a week to figure out a new situation if that's not the world that you were expecting to be in. They're going to have different opinions about things like employee status, about who should shoulder the responsibility for long-term health care, or about regulations regarding when you can practice or how you can practice and how much control that a coach has over your life. We also heard from some players that are like, we don't actually love how transient college football is now, because if you're a quarterback, you want to know if your linemen are going to be there next year or the guys that you're throwing passes to. It takes a long time to build up that chemistry. And if 2/3 of your roster grabs an NIL bag and transfers, your own experience gets worse. So what I think my biggest takeaway was that a lot of current athletes don't know, and they want to talk to each other and they want to have a voice in this process. It's pretty easy for guys like you and I to call up a coach or an AD or a lawyer and ask them what they think. It's not every day we get to hear what Sawyer thinks,
Matt Brown, again, Extra Points with us on 365 Sports. Of the constant changes, there's that, what do you call it, the NCAA deal that is supposed to be done in April, and yet there's more changes, and then the junior college thing popped up. Matt, where are we going to be when April ends?
Man, I'll tell you, brother, if I knew exactly, this would be a way more expensive newsletter, because ADs call me. And I'm like, this is probably not a great sign if I have a better idea about what might happen than you. But the very frustrating thing, I know for everyone, whether you're people like us or a fan or a coach or a suit or anything else, is that so much of this now is not driven by anybody at the coaches convention, anybody in the NCAA. It's driven by lawyers. It's driven by judges who may or may not understand college sports or care that much about it at all. I think it is more likely than not, just from talking to attorneys and industry people, that the House settlement is approved in April. But I definitely don't think it's 100%. There are some significant and meaningful opposition to that settlement, whether that's from many Big 12 athletes who are walk-ons and don't want to lose their roster spots immediately, whether that's other advocacy groups who are concerned that the $20.4 million number is another arbitrary salary cap that wasn't negotiated, whether it's some ambulance chasers who don't really have any particularly noble big picture goal other than to grab some more cash. And that's part of how our legal system here works too. The only important thing is that anybody involved in this world has to have plan A, B, C, D, E, and F, because you just can't control what judges or Charlie Baker is going to do, and you just have to be ready to pivot whenever you get the email from Indianapolis.
Matt, I'm curious how you – and I covered the Dallas Cowboys for years, and I'm a Cowboys fan, and I always wondered how I'd react in trying to be professional, in that sense. But I don't really have to worry about it because Jerry Jones exists. But you covered your alma mater in a professional sense while they were winning a national championship. What was the inner workings of Matt Brown during that game?
I have to be completely honest. Covering one of those events in person is such a chaotic and busy experience that for most of the game, and certainly right afterwards, I was too busy to really to soak in this moment. There was a time early in the third quarter when Ohio State's win expectancy was 98%, and I was like, oh, this is actually happening. I wonder how I'm going to feel about it. But then at the moment, you're so focused on, you get down to the field level and there's a gajillion people running around. I'm like, am I in the right place to go take this picture? Am I going to miss this press conference? What's happening over here? And you're hopped up on adrenaline. I really didn't feel anything, honestly, until 2:15 in the morning after I had filed a story, after I had done all the interviews, and can kind of just stand there on the field and take this moment in. The one thing, though, that I did experience, which sometimes I take for granted, I think maybe some of us might take for granted who are listening here, is that even though college football players are 6'3", 260 pounds, can do the 40-yard dash in 4.2 seconds, they're 20 years old. And one of the things that you see on the field after a gigantic win is you see college football players celebrate like college students. You can hear them cracking dumb jokes. You see them hugging. You see them crying. You see them just releasing all of this relief from this bundled up season in a way that I think is different from somebody who's a grown man who's 32 and been playing in the NFL for 9 years. And that kind of seeing that so viscerally when you're like 2 feet away, I think it's important for having more empathy as we cover the sport, because I understand people that are like, look, man, these aren't amateurs anymore. A lot of these guys are making more money than I am, and I don't want to. I want to treat them accordingly, and I understand that. And that, yes, they may very well be making more money than me, but they are still 20. Mm-hmm. They still don't have the completely developed prefrontal cortex, right? Like there's still like age appropriate behavior going on, and I think it's just a good thing to have that in the back of your mind whenever you're mad at something any of these guys may or may not do. And my experience at that stadium helped, remind me of that.
Paul texted me and said you jumped in front of Ryan Day when Molly McGrath was trying to interview him, and I just thought that was a little bit much. I thought that was
Matt, you and I, I think Smokey was gone that day, but the last time we had you on might have been we were talking about how the theory of Ryan Day going, maybe being the Colts offensive coordinator would be a fun gig if they lost to Tennessee, and that could not have been more wrong.
No, I legitimately thought Ohio State was going to get dog walked by Tennessee. I thought Tennessee was going to win by 17. Yeah, and think of the vibes, right? You've got Ball Nation with 35% of the stands in Columbus. Ohio State's reeling after one of the most embarrassing and heartbreaking losses in program history. And the Vultures route, and they just beat the crap out of them. And I think it might be interesting to see what happens with Day after this, because look, the guy's admitting I had to get private security on my house after we lost to Michigan. People are screaming at my children at the grocery store. It's a high pressure gig, and he's still relatively young. He's rich, and he knows ball. And if he decided hypothetically in a year or two, I think I'd rather just go to the NFL where I can lose 4 games a year and make people and nobody complains. And I wouldn't blame him in the least, right? That's what Paul Brown did. Ohio State is not an easy place to coach, and that's why people almost always leave that job against their will. There's no indication of that now. I mean, I think he would be within his rights to start knocking on random doors in Columbus and say, like, demand an apology, including from me. I next time I talk to him, if he wants to tell me where to stick it where the sun don't shine, like that's part of the gig. He's earned that. He's earned that right. It's just hard. The Cowboys example is not too far off, I think, in terms of just all the attention.
Great stuff, Matt. I saw where you picked up Sam Weber as a part of your umbrella. Is that correct? He was with Open Doors?
He was, yeah. We brought in a PR and marketing executive here. Hey, Estella. To help take the load off me so I could focus a little bit more on writing and reporting. We've got 4 full-time employees now, and we're really excited about where this year could be going for Extra Points.
Have fun, man. Good to see you. Go be your
All
dad.
Right.
Go be a father.
Okay,
there you go. Matt Brown.
I'll go be a dad.
Points. It's been a while. Great to have him. He just cranks out material. It's unbelievable. And it just sometimes it's like, oh, my God, I don't have time to read it. But I always look in for a nugget or two